Luis, Sean, and I did How Model Minority Myth Perpetuates Asian Poverty in the US. What we're going to be talking about is model minority, basically a simple overview of what it is and some examples of model minorities. Luis is going to talk about Asian poverty in today's situation, especially in the New York, New Jersey area. And Sean will be talking about relations to Asian poverty and how and why the model minority myth is dangerous, especially when it comes to awareness of Asian poverty. Sean will conclude as well. So what is model minority? Model minority myth is basically a stereotype. It's something that claims that Asians are very smart and especially gifted in the math and science fields. So if you look at the chart on the corner, you can see that the net worth among Asian groups in Los Angeles is pretty low. And I know this isn't in the Northeast coast, but I just wanted to point out how low the median net worth of Asian groups just in general is. And where did model minority originate from? So about in the 1960s, in the middle of the civil rights movement, journal articles started talking about a model minority myth for Asians. They were basically just portraying Asians as very successful and very smart. And how it basically affects Asians is it generalizes Asians, so it removes the individuality of each Asian groups and Asian individuals. And due to the whole stereotype and pressure applied to the students, they can have mental effects and they will have a lot of hard times in school. They will have a lot of stress, and many can go into depression. And this overlooks Asians' needs and problems. And by that, I mean it overlooks the fact that some Asians, or even most Asians, could be in poverty. And if you look to the chart on the left, it's a chart of percentage of Asian children and families with incomes below the poverty level in 2014. And if you look at the very top, it's New York with about 20%.
Today's Asian poverty, how dire is the current situation? Who makes up the Asian American poverty? The AAPI community is the fastest growing community in the US, and that's really great in the sense of cultural and societal contributions, but it also makes the community more susceptible to poverty ever since the Great Recession. Between 2007 to 2011, the number of AAs, or Asian Americans, but I'll be referring them as AAs in this presentation, living in poverty increased by 37%. More recently, according to the Pew Research Center analysis of the 2022 American Community Survey, around 10% of AAs, roughly 2.3 million of AAs, or at least 1 in 10, live in poverty. However, the poverty rates aren't equal throughout the whole community, and it actually differs for each ethnic group. For example, from that same survey, it found that only 6% of Indians and 7% of Filipinos are found to be living at or below the poverty line, whereas 19% of Burmese and 70% of Hmong ethnic groups live in the same category. Each ethnic group's median household income further shows how much discrepancy there is within that 10% poverty rate statistic. So for example, generally, higher median household incomes come from Asian Indians, Filipino, and Japanese households. So around $95,000, $80,000, and $70,500 are the common median household incomes for those ethnic groups respectively. Compared to Cambodian, Hmong, and Bangladesh households, so $53,700, $52,500, and $46,950 respectively. And although that all these income median household incomes are higher than the US's national median household income, living in poverty, which is around $30,000 or less, there's still valid reasons as to why they would be considered living in poverty. One of the most notable factors is housing. Most AAs live in concentrated groups. They're actually the second most concentrated group living in poverty, the first being Pacific Islanders. And around 50% of these AAs would live in 10 metropolitan statistical areas, or MSAs. These MSAs include New York, LA, San Francisco, Chicago, San Jose, Houston, Sacramento, Philadelphia, Boston, and Seattle. These areas are notorious for their expensive housing markets. For example, let's look at New York. Around 88% of AAs in New York would fall under the category called housing cost burden, which means that 30% of their household budget is put towards housing costs. Furthermore, an estimated $6,098 for a family of 4 living in New York without rent is expected. And comparing to LA, this is like 26.4% more expensive than LA. But if you look at rent, New York's rent is also like on average around 61.2% higher than LA. But besides rent, AAs living in the 4 states, so Hawaii, New York, New Jersey, and California, also experience something called high regional price parity scores, aka measure comparing regional prices for goods to national average. Which spikes 50% of AA's costs of living further. So a lot of the areas that AAs live in kind of forces them to naturally spend most of their median household income on just housing alone, and that leaves very little room for basic needs like food, transportation, paying the bills. Just from looking at housing alone and where the money goes, it's easy to understand why many AAs would be easily susceptible to fall under poverty. And living in poverty is no easy life for any ethnic group, but because this is a focus on AAs, we're going to talk about their specific financial struggles. In a 2022 to 23 survey given to the AA community, a question asked participants if they had ever experienced at least one of the financial challenges listed on the slide. 33% who live or below the poverty line experienced problems paying rent. 30% had gotten food from a food bank or a charitable organization, and 42% had trouble paying bills. The small number indicates the participants who live above the poverty line. So 11% experienced a problem paying rent, 6% had gotten food from a food bank, and around 70% had trouble paying bills. The survey never disclosed specific percentages for these following categories, but additional financial struggles include, losing health insurance, having trouble paying medical bills, whether it be for themselves or other family members, or unable to save for an emergency fund. The last one is super key in that that's a common struggle that a lot of A's in poverty face, and they want to overcome, but it's hard because, of course, a lot of their income needs to go to other things first before they could have money to put in their savings and whatnot. To put a number on this, around 57% living in poverty say they can save, and around 40% who will live above say the same thing. So obviously saving for an emergency fund is crucial because you never know when a difficult situation arises, whether it be unexpected hospital bills, sudden housing or rent spikes, inflation periods, etc. So having that backup plan would essentially help a lot of AAs out and not have them fall into poverty. But again, it's easier said than done. Moving on, so from that same 2022 Pew Research Survey, a third of Asian Americans 25 years and older with a BA live in poverty. And this is compared to the 14% who fall under the same category but are non-Asians. So this kind of feels contradictory to the model minority myth in that many people believe that, Asians, because they're so smart and they're so capable, that they're going to leave college or higher education with successful lives. But the statistics prove otherwise. So the fact is actually that AAs are less likely than non-Hispanic whites to hold a high school degree, which is around 47%. And high school dropout rates are high among especially the Southeast Asian community. For example, Hmong students, around 40% would drop. Laotian students, 30% often drop high school, and Cambodian students, around 35%, also drop high school. Most of the time, AAs don't complete higher education or even high school simply because that sense of family responsibility. They felt like the time and energy that they spent studying could be put into working and providing for their families. And yes, like that financial aspect of education plays a part in the reasoning why they don't continue higher education because, there's that, for example, like college tuition and the debt that follows. It's really hard to overcome that for some people. But the larger motivator for giving up higher education is guilt. And that's a valid reasoning, that's a valid thinking, but at the same time, this mindset is only going to further that generational poverty of the families because education, it really is the key to escape poverty. A 2021 study from about Asian poverty in the New York metro area conducted by the Asian American Federation recommended that local and state governments should start implementing an outreach campaign to ensure AA families have access to educational opportunities. They also encourage workforce development to also form programs for their workers who don't have like formal education but can also learn new skills at the same time. And specifically for adult language learners, particularly Asian immigrant women who are more likely to be in poverty and in the workforce than Asian immigrant men, they should be the focus of job developmental programs designed to meet their cultural needs and hopefully help them escape poverty. So again, the key ticket here is education.
Relations to Asian poverty, how and why the model minority myth is dangerous in the awareness of Asian poverty. So to recap, the model minority myth portrays all Asians as financially successful, academically gifted, and stable. As shown in this survey of Asian Americans by Pew Research Center, nearly 2/3 of Asian adults have experienced stereotypes related to the model minority myth. While some groups may fit this stereotype, this overgeneralization is dangerous for the Asian American community. Many Asian subgroups, such as Cambodians, Hmong, and Pacific Islanders, experience much higher rates of poverty, but these struggles are masked by the success of wealthier groups. This stereotype creates a dangerous illusion. And why does this matter? It matters because this myth reduces awareness of Asian poverty, which perpetuates a cycle of neglect and misunderstanding. Now, this quote is by Eric Liu, a very successful Asian American. He's a CEO of Citizen University. He said, "Great numbers of Asian Americans do not fit the model minority or tiger family stereotypes, living instead in multi-generational poverty far from the mainstream." So to go into that, now what happens when we buy into this myth? Entire subgroups become marginalized. Their financial struggles get overshadowed by the successes of other Asian Americans. For example, the poverty rate among Hmong Americans is very high compared to the overall Asian American average, but this reality often gets ignored. It's as if these subgroups are hidden in the shadows of the model minority narrative. This leads to many real-life consequences. These can take form in less funding, fewer social programs, and little to no policy support for those who need it most. Going into that, this myth has real and tangible effects. Policymakers and governments often perceive Asians as a self-sufficient community. This basically means that the myth tells them that Asians don't need as much help, and so they give fewer resources for poverty relief. So if we take a look at New York in 2014, Asian Americans represented 17.9% of people living in poverty in New York City. But not only that, but they had the highest poverty rate of any racial or ethnic group at 29%. However, although they make up a lot of people living in poverty and have a really high poverty rate, the Asian American community only receive 1.4% of the total value of social service contracts and 1.5% of total contract dollars from the Department of Social Services. Thus, while a significant portion of Asians in New York live in poverty, they are often overlooked for welfare or housing assistance because of the stereotype that they don't need it. As a result, many struggling Asian families are left without support, making it nearly impossible to escape poverty. So, just to summarize, this model minority myth isn't just an idea, it directly affects people's lives. Just because people think that Asian groups do not need help, they don't give help, and then the people that actually are living in poverty don't get any help. The broader impact of the model minority myth. This myth doesn't just harm Asians, it creates a damaging comparison with other minority groups. People begin to think if Asians can succeed, why can't everyone else? This puts racial and ethnic groups against each other. So I can relate to this personally because at my school, the student body population is majority Black, and there are many instances where many students treat other Asian students badly. They believe in the model minority myth that all Asians are well off and attack them based on that. And while that's just a small example, this harmful comparison perpetuates division and resentment. By focusing on the success of one group, we fail to address the struggles of many other groups. And to beat poverty and inequality, we need to approach these issues with empathy and not just through a one-size-fits-all stereotype. To conclude, the model minority myth oversimplifies and distorts the reality of Asian American experiences. By doing so, it blocks access to necessary aid and services for those who truly need it. To break free from this harmful stereotype, we need to challenge these narratives in our lives, media, and policies. Greater awareness and understanding of the diversity within the Asian American community is essential if we are to create more ecosystems of support. Only then can we address poverty, not just for Asian Americans, but for all communities.